The Wyoming sun painted the endless prairie grass crimson. As Hannah Whitlock urged her horse across the open range, the leather satchel pressed tight against her ribs. Behind her, the thunder of pursuing hoofbeats grew closer, punctuated by the sharp crack of rifle shots that split the evening air like whip strikes. "There she goes." The voice carried on the wind, rough and predatory. "Don't let that woman reach town alive." Hannah clutched the account ledger tighter against her chest, feeling its weight through the worn leather. 3 days of careful work at the Quicksilver mining office had led to this desperate flight. 3 days of pretending to balance routine books while secretly copying entries that made her blood freeze. Victor Hale's systematic bribes to Sheriff Merrick. Payments for blasting powder to destroy competing water sources. Detailed plans for a dam that would flood every small homestead in the valley, leaving Hale as the sole controller of water rights across thousands of acres. Most disturbing of all were the payments to someone known only as the Ghost of Willow River, a mysterious enforcer whose work was compensated handsomely but never described in detail. The timing of these payments coincided with the disappearances and accidents that had befallen anyone who dared oppose Hale's expansion. Hannah's investigation had also uncovered another chilling detail. The ghost had first appeared in Hale's ledgers almost exactly 1 year ago, around the same time her younger brother Lucas had vanished without a trace. A bullet whistled past her left ear so close she felt its heat singe her hair. Her mare stumbled on uneven ground, and Hannah felt herself sliding sideways in the saddle. Sharp pain exploded across her ribs as another shot found its mark, tearing through her vest and drawing blood. She gasped, tasting copper, but managed to stay mounted despite the burning agony that spread through her torso. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by occasional stands of cottonwood and the meandering line of the Willow River in the distance. The drought had turned the normally green landscape into a sea of brown and gold, with dust devils dancing on the horizon like ghosts. It was beautiful and terrible country capable of sustaining life or destroying it with equal indifference. Then her horse stepped in a prairie dog burrow and went down hard. Hannah hit the earth with brutal force, rolling through the tall blue-stem grass as her mount screamed and thrashed with a shattered foreleg. The precious ledger flew from her hands, disappearing somewhere in the amber sea of prairie vegetation. She crawled forward on her belly, her wounded side burning with each movement as the riders closed the distance behind her. The smell of dust and dried grass filled her nostrils, mixing with the metallic scent of her own blood. Spread out in a line. The lead gunman's voice was much closer now. "She's on foot and bleeding. Can't have gone far through this grass." Hannah found the ledger and pressed it against her chest, trying to become invisible among the swaying stalks. Blood trickled down her cheek from where a bullet had creased the skin near her temple. Every breath sent fire through her ribs. In the gathering dusk, she could hear the men dismounting their boots, crushing through the grass in a methodical search pattern that would find her within minutes. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, with a sound like distant voices carrying the scent of approaching rain and the far-off howl of coyotes beginning their evening hunt. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, cold and distant witnesses to the drama unfolding below. "Miss." The voice came from directly beside her, so quiet she almost missed it over the sound of her own labored breathing. Hannah's heart nearly stopped. She turned her head slowly and found herself looking into dark eyes that seemed to capture the last light of the prairie sky. A man lay motionless in the grass beside her, lean and weathered with long black hair braided with small eagle feathers. His clothes mixed traditional buckskin with settler's cotton, and he held a Spencer rifle with the casual familiarity of someone born to it. "Like Cheyenne," she whispered, more statement than question. He nodded once. "Wkeza? I heard the gunfire from the ridge where I was scouting for my people. These men hunt you with great determination. They'll kill me if they catch me." The words came out broken, edged with pain and exhaustion. "This ledger proves Victor Hale is buying water rights illegally. building a dam to control the entire valley through bribery and intimidation. Something shifted in Wkeza's dark eyes at the mention of the dam. Such a structure would flood the traditional river crossing my people have used for generations. We came to this area seeking negotiations for seasonal water access. Another voice called out from perhaps 60 yards away. Check those rock formations by the creek bed. She's bleeding. Look for a blood trail in the dirt. It hurts too much. Hannah whispered, pressing her hand against her wounded side. The grass around her was darkening with blood, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Wkeza met her eyes with steady certainty. That's why I'm here. He moved through the grass, with fluid silence sliding forward like flowing water. Hannah followed, biting her lip against the pain as they crawled toward the sound of running water. Behind them, she could hear the searchers getting closer, their voices growing sharper with frustration and the promise of violence. The Willow River ran lower than usual in the drought, but its banks were thick with cattails and willow scrub that provided cover. The water reflected the last light of day, creating ripples of silver and gold that reminded Hannah of her childhood, when she and Lucas would skip stones across this same river while their father worked his claim upstream. Wkeza paused at the water's edge, listening intently. 3 riders had spread out along the bank, their horses stamping and snorting in the gathering darkness. Movement over there. One of them pointed toward a splash in the water near a fallen cottonwood. By that deadfall tree, Wkeza's Spencer rifle came up smooth and practiced the barrel tracking toward the lead rider's horse rather than the man himself. The shot cracked across the water, and the animal screamed, dropping to its knees with a shattered leg. The rider went down hard, cursing and scrambling for cover behind rocks. Into the water, Wkeza said simply. Stay low and follow my lead. They slipped into the cold current together, Hannah gasping as it closed over her wounds and soaked through her clothes. The river was stronger than it appeared, tugging at her legs and threatening to sweep her downstream. Wkeza guided her toward the massive cottonwood that had fallen across the channel years ago, its branches creating a natural blind beneath the surface. More shots rang out, bullets chopping splinters from the fallen tree trunk. Hannah pressed herself against the rough bark while the icy water numbed her injured side. Her strength was ebbing with each heartbeat, and she wondered if she would drown before the gunman could finish her. The current will carry us downstream, Wkeza said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of rushing water. Behind that gravel bar where they cannot see us. I don't know if I can swim that far. You will not need to swim. Trust the river. The Willow River bent sharply around a stand of river birch, and the current carried them into calmer water behind a bar of smooth stones. They could hear the searchers shouting to each other, but the voices were growing distant as confusion spread among Hale's men. Hannah dragged herself onto the gravel water streaming from her clothes and hair. The ledger was thoroughly soaked, but the ink had not run badly enough to obscure the crucial entries. She could still read the damning evidence of Hale's systematic corruption, including those mysterious payments to the ghost that had first alerted her to the connection between her brother's disappearance and Hale's criminal enterprise. 4 days earlier, the town of Ash River had awakened to another cloudless sky and the promise of another scorching day. The drought had persisted for 18 months, now turning the usually green valley into a patchwork of brown stubble and cracked earth that stretched to the distant mountains. The Willow River ran lower than anyone could remember, and tempers in town were just as short as the water supply. Hannah Whitlock had arrived at the Quicksilver mining office before dawn, as was her custom during busy accounting periods. At 28, she possessed the lean, practical build of someone who had never known leisure, and the careful, observant eyes of someone who had learned early that the world could strip away everything without warning. Her father's death in a mining accident 10 years ago had left her and her younger brother Lucas with nothing but debts and the hard-earned knowledge that survival meant making yourself useful to those with power. She had always been exceptionally good, with numbers better than most men in town, and the mining office paid her $30 a month to keep their books balanced and their correspondence properly filed. It was not much money, but it kept her fed and housed at Beatrice Lowe's boarding house. And it gave her access to financial information that most folks never saw. Information like the mysterious account ledger she was supposed to be filing that gray morning. The ledger was bound in dark leather, worn smooth by countless hands, and it contained records that made Hannah's blood run cold. She had noticed the discrepancies weeks ago during routine bookkeeping work. Payments to Sheriff Claude Merrick that did not match any official deputy salaries listed in territorial records. Purchases of blasting powder that far exceeded what the mine actually used for legitimate operations. Most disturbing were references to someone called the Ghost, a mysterious enforcer who never appeared in official records, but whose work was paid for handsomely. She had started keeping mental notes at first, then written notes hidden in her personal journal, and finally careful copies of the most damning entries. What she discovered made her hands shake with anger and her stomach churn with disgust. Victor Hale was not just the biggest cattle rancher in the territory. He was systematically buying up water rights through bribery, intimidation, and outright murder. The dam he wanted to build on the Willow River was not simply about irrigation for his vast herds. It was about absolute control. Once the dam was complete, he could flood out any homestead that refused to sell to him at his price, and deny water to anyone who challenged his growing authority. But it was the references to the Ghost of Willow River that truly chilled her blood. Payment after payment for services that were never explicitly described, but the timing suggested this mysterious figure was responsible for the disappearances and accidents that had befallen anyone who opposed Hale's expansion. The Ghost's first appearance in the ledgers coincided almost exactly with Lucas's disappearance, a detail that Hannah tried desperately to dismiss as coincidence. "You are here early again, Miss Whitlock?" Hannah looked up to find Jeremiah Moss, the mine foreman, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands. He was a thin, nervous man in his 50s, the kind who jumped at shadows and counted his pay twice every month. She had always assumed his constant nervousness came from the inherent dangers of mining work. But now she wondered if he knew more about Hale's illegal activities than he let on. "The books will not balance themselves, Mr. Moss." Hannah kept her voice professionally level. "And I prefer the quiet in the early morning hours. It helps me concentrate on complex calculations." Moss nodded, but his eyes lingered uncomfortably on the open ledger spread across her desk. "Just remember that some of those accounts contain sensitive information. Company business that requires discretion, you understand." "Of course." Hannah turned a page, acting as if she was searching for a routine entry. "I only record what I am specifically authorized to record." "Good. That is very good." Moss fidgeted with his hat brim, clearly wanting to say more, but lacking the courage. "Mr. Hale places great value on discretion among his business associates. The Ghost taught us all that lesson very clearly." Hannah felt ice form in her stomach. The Ghost. Nothing. Just... Moss glanced around nervously, as if expecting the mysterious figure to materialize from the shadows. "Well, you know how these mining camps can be. Stories get told, legends grow. But some legends are true." "What kind of stories?" Moss's face went pale. "Stories about a man who can track anyone across stone, who moves like smoke through the wilderness, who knows the land better than any white man should. They say he learned his skills from the Cheyenne, but uses them for darker purposes." Hannah's heart began to race. "Have you seen him?" "Once. From a distance. He was watching the McReady place the night before it burned down." Moss shuddered visibly. Tall, lean, moved like a ghost through the trees. Never saw his face, but there was something familiar about the way he carried himself. Something that reminded me of... He stopped abruptly. "Reminded you of what?" "Nothing. Nothing at all." Moss backed toward the door. Just remember what I said about discretion, Miss Whitlock. The ghost doesn't appreciate people who ask too many questions. After Moss left, Hannah sat very still for a long moment, her mind racing. The ghost was real, and Moss knew about him. More than that, he was afraid of him. She thought of her brother Lucas, missing for almost a year now. Before he disappeared, he'd been asking questions about water rights and Hale's business dealings, just like she was doing now. The terrible possibility that had been growing in her mind for weeks suddenly seemed much less impossible. That afternoon, she found herself at Dr. Edwin Carter's medical office, ostensibly to have him examine a cut on her hand from a broken mason jar. In reality, she wanted to test the waters with someone she trusted before making any irreversible decisions. Dr. Carter was 55 years old and carried himself with the straight-backed dignity of a former Army surgeon. He had served with distinction during the Civil War, though he rarely spoke of those experiences, and had come west afterward seeking something redemption, perhaps, or simply a place where old ghosts could not follow him. He was one of the few white men in town who treated the Cheyenne fairly when they came to trade, and one of the even fewer who would speak up against injustice when he witnessed it firsthand. His office was a cramped but clean space above the general store filled with medical supplies and the smell of carbolic acid. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the examination table where Hannah now sat, her hand extended for Carter's inspection. "That is a clean cut," Carter observed, dabbing antiseptic on Hannah's palm. "Glass, I presume. A mason jar broke while I was preserving vegetables." Hannah watched his weathered face carefully. "Dr. Carter, have you heard any stories about someone called the Ghost of Willow River?" Carter's hands paused for just a moment in their work, but his voice remained steady. "Where did you hear that name?" "Around town. People whisper about someone who makes Hale's problems disappear." "Yes, they do whisper." Carter resumed cleaning the wound, but his voice had grown notably careful. "They say he's not from around here originally, that he knows the land better than any white man should, that he can track a man across stone and kill without making a sound." Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think he's real?" "I think Victor Hale has many tools at his disposal, Miss Whitlock. Some more subtle than others." Carter's expression grew more serious. "Why are you asking about this particular tool?" "Because I think I might know who he is." Carter's hands stilled completely. "That's a dangerous thing to think, let alone say aloud. My brother Lucas has been missing for almost a year. He disappeared right around the time the ghost first started working for Hale. Lucas knew the wilderness knew Cheyenne ways from trading with them as a boy. If someone captured him, tortured him, broke him..." Hannah's voice trailed off. "You think Hale turned your brother into his personal assassin?" "I think it's possible. The timing fits. The skills match." And there was something Moss said about the ghost looking familiar. Carter finished bandaging her hand in silence, his face grave with thought. "Even if you're right, Hannah, what could you possibly do about it? If Lucas has been changed into something like that, he's beyond any help you could provide." "Maybe, but I have to know the truth." Before Carter could respond, the office door opened without a knock, and a tall figure stepped inside. Hannah's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the man from the town market, clearly Cheyenne, but dressed in a practical mixture of traditional and settler clothing that marked him as someone who moved skillfully between both worlds. "Dr. Carter," the man said, in careful but excellent English. "My name is Wkeza. I come as a representative of the Northern Cheyenne Band, currently camped at Owl Canyon. Our chief sent me to speak with you about our people's urgent need for medical supplies." Carter stood and extended his hand in genuine welcome. "You are most welcome here, Wkeza. What can I do to help your people?" "The drought has been extremely hard on my band. Our traditional water sources have dried completely, and we need to cross the Willow River to reach the natural springs in the eastern hills." but we have heard disturbing rumors that a dam is being built that would permanently block our access." Hannah felt her heart begin to race. Here was someone else who would be directly and devastatingly affected by Hale's dam project, someone who had just as much to lose as the small homesteaders, perhaps even more. "I have heard those same rumors," Carter replied diplomatically. "Are your people prepared to negotiate for formal crossing rights?" "We are a peaceful people, Dr. Carter. We want only what we need to ensure our survival. But if the river crossing is permanently blocked..." Wkeza left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was unmistakably clear. As the three of them talked, Hannah found herself studying Wkeza more closely. He appeared to be about 30 years old, with the lean build and quiet confidence of someone completely accustomed to living off the land. His dark eyes were intelligent and constantly watchful, and he carried himself with the easy, natural grace of an experienced scout or tracker. There was something about his presence that suggested both strength and gentleness, the kind of man who could be equally at home in battle or tending to the sick. "There have been stories," Wkeza said quietly, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "of a man who works for the rancher Hale. A man who knows our ways, but uses them for evil purposes. They call him the Ghost." Hannah's blood ran cold. "You've heard of him too. We have seen his work. Families who opposed the dam found their livestock slaughtered in ways that looked like wolf attacks, but no wolf kills with such precision. Men who spoke against selling their land disappeared on trails they had traveled safely for years." Dr. Carter leaned forward intently. "What does this ghost look like?" "That is the terrible thing," Wkeza replied, his voice heavy with sadness. "No one sees him clearly and lives to tell. But there are signs. He uses Cheyenne tracking methods, but twisted for hunting men instead of game. He knows our sacred places and defiles them with his presence." Hannah felt sick to her stomach. Could he be someone who was captured, taught your ways against his will? Possible. Or... Wkeza's voice grew even heavier with sadness. Or someone who chose to betray his own people for gold and power. The conversation was interrupted by commotion in the street outside. Through the window, they could see riders approaching at full gallop, Sheriff Merrick, leading a group of armed men, their faces grim with purpose. "They're heading west," Carter observed, "toward the homestead lands." Hannah felt dread settle in her stomach like a stone. The Steiners. August refused to sign over his water rights yesterday. The Steiners were German immigrants who had homesteaded a modest but productive spread 5 miles west of town. August was a quiet, hard-working man, with a wife named Greta and 2 young children, Johann and Anna. Their small farm was not impressive by territorial standards, but their section of the Willow River was absolutely crucial for irrigation. More importantly, they were the kind of stubborn, principled people who would never surrender to intimidation. Hannah had visited their farm several times over the past year, helping Greta with correspondence and account-keeping since the woman's English was still limited. She had come to know the family well. August, with his quiet dignity and fierce protectiveness of his children, Greta, with her warm smile and generous heart, little Johann with his serious expression and premature sense of responsibility, and Anna with her infectious laugh and boundless curiosity about the world around her. 20 minutes later, they saw the smoke rising on the western horizon, thick black columns that meant buildings were burning out of control. Hannah's worst fears were confirmed when August's wagon came racing toward town and the man's face streaked with soot and tears while his 2 children huddled in the wagon bed like frightened animals. But there was no sign of Greta. August pulled up directly in front of Dr. Carter's office and half fell from the wagon seat. His hands were burned raw from fighting the fire, and there was a bullet graze across his left shoulder that had soaked his shirt with blood. His eyes held the wild, desperate look of a man who had lost everything that mattered to him. Mein Gott in Himmel. August gasped in heavily accented English, his voice breaking with emotion. They came at dawn like devils from hell. The ghost, he was there watching from the hills while they burned everything. My Greta. His voice broke completely. She tried to save the family Bible, the letters from home. The roof, it came down on her. As Dr. Carter treated the family's injuries with gentle efficiency, August told his horrific story in broken phrases punctuated by sobs and the sound of his children crying softly. The attack had been swift and coordinated, clearly planned to cause maximum psychological damage. Greasy Pete and Hawkeye had set the fires, while a third figure, one who moved like smoke and shadow, had cut off all escape routes and terrorized the family with his presence. He never spoke. August said, his voice hollow with grief and terror. Just stood there on the ridge, watching us run like frightened rabbits. But his eyes, God im Himmel, his eyes were like ice. Like a man who had forgotten how to feel human emotion. Hannah felt tears streaming down her face as she comforted the traumatized children. Little Anna kept asking for her mama in German, while Johann stared into space with the hollow expression of someone who had seen too much horror for his young mind to process. The boy had always been serious beyond his years, but now he looked ancient, worn down by grief and terror. The ghost. August continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw him for just a moment, silhouetted against the flames. He wore our clothes but moved like an Indian. And his eyes... The man shuddered. His eyes were dead, like a man who had sold his soul to the devil himself. Hannah's suspicions about the ghost's identity grew stronger with each detail. The description matched someone she had once known, someone who had learned tracking from Cheyenne friends as a boy, someone who could move through the wilderness without leaving a trace. Someone like her brother Lucas, but she pushed the terrible thought away. Lucas might be missing, might even be dead, but he would never become a monster like the ghost. Would he? That night, as they planned their next move in the relative safety of Dr. Carter's office, Hannah found herself thinking about the ghost with growing certainty and dread. The descriptions matched too well, the timing was too perfect, and the skills were too specific to be coincidental. But accepting that her brother had become Hale's personal killer meant accepting that the boy she had raised and loved was gone forever, replaced by something monstrous and inhuman. The plan they developed was necessarily desperate. Hannah would use her access to the mining office to gather more evidence of Hale's conspiracy, specifically looking for records that might reveal the ghost's true identity. Wkeza would scout the dam construction site to find weaknesses they could exploit. Dr. Carter would use his medical practice as cover for coordinating their activities and treating any wounded settlers who managed to escape Hale's violence. And Beatrice Lowe, the former schoolteacher who ran both the boarding house and the telegraph office, would try to get word to the territorial authorities in Fort Laramie. But first they needed to rescue the other threatened families before Hale's men could strike again. The Kowalski family lived on a small farm near Beaver Creek, about 8 miles northeast of town. They were Polish immigrants who had arrived in the territory 3 years earlier with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone thought humanly possible. Joseph Kowalski was a man in his 30s with premature gray hair and hands like leather from years of manual labor. His wife Maria was pregnant with their 4th child, and their 3 existing children ranged in age from 4 to 12. When Hannah, Wkeza, and Dr. Carter arrived at the farm just before dusk, they found the family barricaded inside their cabin, the father clutching an old shotgun, while his pregnant wife tried to keep their children calm and quiet. The terror in their eyes was unmistakable. They had heard about what happened to the Steiners, and they knew they were next on Hale's list. "We will not sign," Joseph declared in broken English when they explained their mission. "But we cannot fight the ghost. No one can fight the ghost." The cabin was small and cramped, built from logs that Joseph had cut and hauled himself. The single room served as kitchen parlor and bedroom for the entire family, with a small loft where the older children slept. It was poor by any standard, but it was clean and tidy. And Hannah could see the pride Maria took in making it a home, despite their limited resources. "Maybe we can fight him," Hannah said, though she was far from certain. "But we need to get you and your family to safety first." The evacuation was harrowing and nearly ended in disaster. As they loaded the Kowalski family into their wagon, shots rang out from the surrounding hills. Through her spyglass, Hannah could see a lone figure moving along the ridge, too distant to make out clearly, but moving with the fluid grace of a skilled hunter who knew exactly how to use the terrain to his advantage. "It's him," Wkeza said grimly, his rifle ready. "The ghost is hunting us." The figure on the ridge seemed to be deliberately keeping his distance, content to watch and track their movements, rather than engaging directly. This psychological warfare was almost worse than a direct attack, because it meant the ghost was confident in his ability to strike whenever he chose. He was playing with them like a cat with mice, and everyone in the wagon knew it. They made it back to town just as full darkness fell, but Hannah knew they had been allowed to escape. The ghost could have picked them off easily during the evacuation, but he had chosen not to. He was studying them, learning their patterns and weaknesses so he could strike more effectively when the time came. That realization terrified her more than any direct attack would have. Over the next 3 days, they managed to evacuate 4 more families to the relative safety of town. But each rescue was more dangerous than the last. The ghost seemed to anticipate their every move, appearing at the worst possible moments, to complicate their escape routes and terrify the people they were trying to save. During the McReady evacuation, the family's youngest child, 4-year-old Timmy, nearly drowned when their wagon overturned crossing Beaver Creek. The wooden bridge they had used safely dozens of times before had been subtly sabotaged, a few strategic cuts that would cause it to collapse under the weight of a loaded wagon, but looked like simple structural failure to casual inspection. "He's not just tracking us," Hannah realized as they sat in Dr. Carter's office that night, planning their next move. "He's studying us, learning our patterns so he can stay one step ahead." "Then we need to change our patterns," Wkeza replied. "Become unpredictable. Or we need to confront him directly," Dr. Carter said quietly. "This cat-and-mouse game serves his purposes, not ours." Hannah felt a chill at the thought of facing the ghost in open combat, especially if her worst fears about his identity were correct. But she also knew Carter was right. As long as the mysterious killer remained free to operate, more innocent people would die, and their small group of allies would be picked off one by one. It was Beatrice who provided the breakthrough they needed. She had been monitoring telegraph traffic and intercepting coded messages between Hale's various operations. Most were routine business communications, but one message had caught her attention. "Ghost reports Whitlock woman has evidence. Recommend immediate action. He knows about your investigation," Beatrice told Hannah when she brought the decoded message to their evening meeting. "Whatever you found in those ledgers, it's important enough that they're willing to risk exposing the ghost to stop you." Hannah felt her heart hammering as the implications sank in. "He's coming for me specifically." "Then we make that work in our favor," Wkeza said. "We use you as bait to draw him into a trap." "Absolutely not," Dr. Carter protested. "We're not sacrificing Hannah to catch this monster." "Not sacrificing," Hannah said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. "But if the ghost wants me, maybe it's time I found out who he really is." The trap they set was elegantly simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Hannah would return to the mining office that night, ostensibly to gather more evidence, but actually to provide an irresistible target for the ghost. Wkeza and Dr. Carter would be hidden nearby, ready to spring their own ambush when the killer made his move. What they didn't expect was for the ghost to be waiting inside the building when Hannah arrived. She entered through the back door, using her key, moving quietly through the darkened offices toward the safe where she knew Hale kept his most sensitive documents. The building was eerily quiet, filled with shadows that seemed to move and shift in the dim light filtering through the windows. She had made it halfway across the main room when a voice spoke from the darkness, a voice that stopped her cold and confirmed her worst fears. "Hello, sister." Hannah's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice, even though it sounded different now. Colder, harder, stripped of the warmth and humor she remembered. Slowly she turned toward the sound, her heart breaking even before she saw the figure emerge from the shadows. Lucas stepped into the pale moonlight streaming through the window, and Hannah's worst nightmares were confirmed. Her younger brother was still recognizably himself, but everything soft about him had been burned away by whatever hellish experiences had transformed him into the ghost. His face was leaner, harder, scarred by exposure to sun and wind and violence. His eyes, once bright with curiosity and hope, were now as cold as winter stone. He wore a mixture of settler and Cheyenne clothing, and he moved with the deadly grace she had seen from the hilltops during their evacuations. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you're alive." "Now that depends on how you define alive." He replied, his voice emotionless. "The boy you knew died in a Cheyenne camp 18 months ago. I am something else now, something better suited to this harsh world." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face. "They said you were missing. I searched for you. I never stopped hoping." "The hope is a weakness." Lucas interrupted, his voice cutting through her words like a blade. "Victor Hale taught me that lesson very thoroughly. Hale did this to you." For a moment, something flickered in Lucas's eyes, a ghost of the brother she had known struggling to surface through the layers of conditioning and psychological damage. Then the mask slammed back into place, but not before Hannah saw the pain hidden beneath. "I was investigating his water rights acquisitions, just like you are now." Lucas said, his voice taking on a distant quality, as if he were recounting someone else's story. "I got too close, asked too many questions. His men captured me during a winter storm and handed me over to a renegade Cheyenne band that had been paid to educate me." Hannah's stomach churned as she began to understand the full horror of what had been done to her brother. "They tortured you. They broke me." Lucas said simply, and for a moment his facade cracked enough to reveal the anguish beneath. "Body and spirit. When Hale's men came to collect me 6 months later, there was nothing left of who I used to be. So they gave me a choice: serve the man who had ordered my destruction or die slowly in a cage. So you chose to serve him. I chose to survive. And I discovered I was very good at the work." Lucas's smile was cold and terrible. "The ghost of Willow River was born from the ashes of your weak little brother." Hannah stepped closer, searching his face for some trace of the boy who had helped her tend their father's grave, who had shared his dreams of making something better of their lives. "This isn't you, Lucas. This isn't who you are." "This is exactly who I am," he replied harshly. "Who I had to become to survive in a world that chews up the weak and spits them out. Hale showed me the truth that power is the only thing that matters, and the strong have the right to take whatever they want from the weak." "Is that what you tell yourself when you murder innocent families?" Something dark flickered across Lucas's features, and for a brief moment, Hannah saw through to the tortured soul beneath his conditioning. "I eliminate obstacles to progress. The Steiners, the McCreadys, all those pathetic farmers clinging to land, they're too weak to hold. They're standing in the way of something greater. Hale's Dam will bring prosperity to this valley. It will create jobs, attract investment, build a real future, instead of this collection of mud huts and false hopes." Hannah stared at her brother in horror. He truly believed what he was saying. Whatever they had done to him in that Cheyenne camp, whatever psychological torture Hale had subjected him to afterward, it had fundamentally changed who he was at his core. "You're talking about the people we grew up with," she said desperately. "The Steiners were our friends. Greta used to bring us soup when we were sick. Johann and Anna played with us when we were children. Sentiment is weakness." Lucas replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Attachment to the past prevents us from embracing the future." "And what about me?" she asked quietly. "Am I just another obstacle to eliminate?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the faintest trace of genuine sadness. "You could have been so much more, Hannah. You could have worked with Hale instead of against him. He offered you a position in his organization, a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself, but you chose to cling to childish notions of right and wrong. He never offered me anything. The job at the mining office, access to information, and the opportunity to see how a real empire is built. That was your interview. You failed." Lucas stepped closer, and Hannah could see the pain hidden beneath his cold facade. "I tried to protect you by keeping you ignorant, but you couldn't leave well enough alone." Hannah's hand moved slowly toward the knife at her belt. "So now you're going to kill me. Now I'm going to give you one last chance." Lucas pulled a brass key from his pocket, old and tarnished with intricate markings, that suggested it was designed to open something important. "This key opens the spillway controls at the dam. Hale is planning to flood the valley tomorrow night anyway, to wash away the evidence of what he's done, and start fresh with more cooperative settlers. But if you try to use this key to stop him, you'll walk into a trap that will kill you and everyone you care about." Hannah stared at the key, her mind racing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand the futility of fighting men like Victor Hale. I want you to see that your noble crusade will accomplish nothing except getting good people killed." Lucas set the key on the desk between them. "Take it. Gather your allies. Try to save the valley. And when you fail, when you're dying in the mud with bullets in your back, remember that I gave you the chance to walk away." Hannah picked up the key, feeling its weight in her palm. "You're wrong about one thing, Lucas. The boy I knew isn't dead. He's trapped inside whatever monster you've become, and he's the one who gave me this key." For just a moment, Lucas's mask slipped, and she saw a flash of the brother she remembered, anguished, desperate, screaming silently for help from inside his own personal hell. The real Lucas was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of conditioning and trauma, fighting to break free. Then the mask slammed back into place, harder than before. "Sentiment will get you killed," he said coldly. "Just like it killed Father." With that, he melted back into the shadows, leaving Hannah alone with the key and the terrible knowledge of what her brother had become. But she also carried with her the memory of that brief moment when the real Lucas had looked out through his eyes, pleading for salvation that she didn't know how to provide. Outside, she found Wkeza and Dr. Carter waiting anxiously for her return. Their faces fell when they saw her expression, and the tears streaming down her cheeks. "It was him," she said simply. "The ghost is my brother Lucas." The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Dr. Carter had known Lucas as a boy, had treated his cuts and bruises, had watched him grow into a thoughtful young man, with dreams of making a difference in the world. Wkeza had heard the stories, had seen the pain in Hannah's eyes whenever she spoke of her missing brother. "What did he want?" Carter asked gently. Hannah held up the brass key. "To prove that we can't win." She told them everything about Lucas's capture and torture, his psychological transformation, his genuine belief that Hale represented progress and strength, while the homesteaders represented weakness and obsolescence. She spoke of the trap he had warned her about and the terrible certainty in his voice that their cause was hopeless. "He's wrong," Wkeza said firmly when she finished. "Strength is not measured by the ability to destroy, but by the courage to protect what matters. Maybe. But he knows us now, knows how we think, how we operate. He'll be waiting at the dam. And then we give him what he expects. Dr. Carter said slowly, while doing something he doesn't expect. The plan they developed over the next several hours was necessarily complex, built on misdirection and sacrifice. Hannah would indeed go to the dam with the key, accompanied by Wkeza and a small group of volunteers from the evacuated families. But their real mission would not be to open the spillway. It would be to distract Hale's forces, while Dr. Carter led a separate team to sabotage the dam's foundation using stolen dynamite from the mining office. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was their only chance to save the valley before Hale flooded it into submission. "There's something else," Dr. Carter said, as they finalized their preparations. "Something I haven't told you about the dam's construction." Hannah looked up from the map they had been studying. "What do you mean?" "I've been treating some of the workers' accidents injuries from the construction. The dam isn't just designed to control water flow. Hale's had additional modifications, made extra chambers and channels that aren't on any of the official plans." "What kind of modifications?" "The kind that would allow him to release the entire reservoir at once, creating a flash flood that would scour the valley clean. He's not just planning to control the water, he's planning to use it as a weapon." Hannah felt sick as the implications sank in. "He means to kill everyone who refuses to leave. Everyone who might testify against him, yes. The dam is designed to be both his fortress and his final solution to the problem of opposition." Wkeza studied the map more carefully. "If we can damage the right sections of the foundation, we might be able to prevent the catastrophic release while still allowing controlled drainage." "That's the plan," Carter confirmed. "But it requires precise placement of the charges and perfect timing. If we're off by even a few minutes, we die and Hale wins," Hannah finished. "I understand." As dawn approached, they made their final preparations. The evacuated families had been moved to higher ground east of town, where they would be safe from any flooding. August Steiner, despite his injuries, had insisted on joining the sabotage team, driven by grief for his wife and determination to prevent other families from suffering the same loss. "The children?" Hannah asked, checking her weapons one final time. "Safe with the pastor," Carter confirmed. "Whatever happens tonight, they'll be cared for." Hannah nodded, thinking of little Johann and Anna Steiner, orphaned by Hale's greed and her brother's transformation into something monstrous. They deserved better than a world where power trumped justice and sentiment was viewed as weakness. "Then let's go save the valley," she said. The storm that had been building all day finally broke with tremendous force as Hannah's team approached the Willow River Dam site through the driving rain. The downpour lashed down in thick sheets, turning the normally dusty trail into a treacherous river of mud and making visibility nearly zero beyond a few yards. Lightning split the sky in jagged forks, illuminating the massive concrete structure that stretched across the narrow canyon like a wall between the past and future. It was perfect weather for what they had to do. The storm would mask their approach and make it difficult for Hale's guards to coordinate their defense. But it also made their mission infinitely more dangerous, as the wet conditions would make every surface slippery and treacherous. Behind them, moving through the darkness on a parallel route, came Dr. Carter's sabotage team with their packs of dynamite and fuses. If their plan worked, they would be able to create controlled breaches in the dam structure that would prevent catastrophic flooding, while still allowing the river to flow freely through the valley. If it failed, they would all die, and Hale would achieve his vision of a valley emptied of opposition and ready for his complete domination. The dam site was heavily guarded, just as Lucas had predicted. Hannah could see sentries posted at regular intervals, their oil lamps flickering in the rain like malevolent stars. But she also noticed something that gave her hope. The guards were positioned to repel an attack on the spillway controls, not to prevent someone from approaching the foundation. Lucas had prepared for the wrong battle. "There," Wkeza whispered, pointing toward the concrete control structure built into the center of the dam. The spillway mechanism. Hannah nodded, gripping the brass key tightly. Even knowing it was a trap, she had to make the attempt look real. Their lives depended on selling the deception until Carter's team could complete their sabotage. They made their approach carefully, using the storm and darkness to mask their movements. But they had barely reached the edge of the construction site when figures emerged from concealment all around them, Hale's men armed and ready, with Lucas himself leading them. "I told you this was futile," Lucas said, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of rain and thunder. "But you came anyway, just like I knew you would." Hannah stepped forward, the key visible in her raised hand. "Maybe I came because I believe there's still something worth saving in my brother." "Your brother is dead," Lucas replied coldly. "I killed him myself, along with every other weakness that held me back." Victor Hale emerged from the temporary office building, flanked by more armed men, including the well-dressed stranger Hannah recognized as Marcus Webb, the Territorial Land Commissioner. Hale was a physically imposing man in his 50s, with the kind of commanding presence that demanded attention even in the middle of a storm. "Miss Whitlock," Hale said, his voice carrying over the wind and rain, "you have caused me considerable inconvenience. But I'm a reasonable man. Surrender the evidence you've gathered, and I might let you live to see the dawn." "What evidence?" Hannah replied, playing for time. "You burned the mining office. You have all my records." "Not all of them," Webb interjected. "We know you made copies. We know you've been in contact with territorial authorities. Where are the documents?" Hannah glanced toward the dam's foundation, where she hoped Dr. Carter's team was placing their charges. "What documents? I'm just a bookkeeper." Lucas stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Don't play games, Hannah. You're not good at it. You never were." That was when the first explosion shook the ground beneath their feet. The blast came from the eastern foundation of the dam, followed immediately by two more in rapid succession. Concrete chunks flew through the air, and a section of the dam wall began to sag as water started pouring through the new breach. The carefully controlled demolition was working exactly as planned. "What the hell?" Hale started to say, but his words were cut off as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Dr. Carter's sabotage had worked better than anyone had dared hope. Not only had they damaged the dam structure in precisely the right places, but they had also drawn Hale's guards away from their positions to investigate the explosions. Now the settlers who had volunteered for this desperate mission were engaging the guards in firefights all around the construction site. In the chaos that followed, Hannah saw her chance. She sprinted toward the spillway, controls the brass key ready in her hand. But Lucas was faster, intercepting her before she could reach the mechanism. "I can't let you do this," he said. But his voice lacked the cold certainty she had heard before. "Then stop me," Hannah replied, struggling against his grip on her wrist. They grappled at the edge of the spillway, and their feet slipping on the wet concrete as water continued to pour through the breaches in the dam wall. Hannah could see that Dr. Carter's plan was working. The controlled explosions had created drainage points that would prevent catastrophic flooding while still allowing the river to flow freely. But they had also weakened the entire structure. Cracks were spreading through the concrete, and Hannah realized with growing horror that the dam might collapse completely, sending a wall of water downstream that would destroy everything in its path, including the town of Ash River. "The whole thing's going to come down," she shouted over the noise of rushing water and ongoing gunfire. Lucas looked at the spreading cracks, and for the first time since their reunion, she saw genuine fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for the innocent people who would die if the dam failed catastrophically. "The supports are failing," he said, his voice tight with concern. "If we don't stabilize it somehow." How do we stabilize it?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, his trained mind working furiously to find a solution. Then his expression changed. and she saw a flash of the brilliant, quick-thinking brother she remembered from their childhood. "The spillway," he said. "If we can open it, completely release the pressure behind the dam, it might hold long enough for people to evacuate." Hannah stared at him. "You mean save the very people you've been hunting?" "I mean prevent a disaster that would kill thousands." Lucas replied, and she heard something in his voice that she hadn't heard in years. Genuine emotion, real concern for human life. "When did I become someone who would cause such horror?" Before Hannah could answer, Victor Hale appeared behind them, his gun drawn, and pointed at Lucas's back. "You treacherous little bastard. I should have known you'd revert to type eventually. Victor." Lucas said, not turning around. "The dam is failing. We need to evacuate everyone from the valley floor immediately." "The dam is fine." Hale snarled, his voice edged with madness. "A few cracks, nothing more. You're just looking for an excuse to betray me, just like everyone else. Look around you." Lucas gestured at the spreading damage. "This whole structure is coming apart." But Hale wasn't listening. His empire was crumbling around him, his vision of absolute control dissolving in the chaos of battle and the reality of the dam's structural failure. His mind had snapped under the pressure, and he was no longer capable of rational thought. "I built this dam to control the valley," he raged, "and I'll see it completed if I have to kill every settler between here and the territorial border." He pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Lucas in the back, sending him stumbling forward toward the spillway opening. But instead of falling, he grabbed the brass key from Hannah's hand and lunged toward the control mechanism with the last of his strength. "Lucas, no." Hannah screamed, realizing what he intended to do. Her brother looked back at her one last time, and she saw in his eyes not the cold killer he had become, but the boy who had once promised to protect her no matter what. "Tell them," he said, his voice growing weak from blood loss. "Tell them the ghost is dead." He inserted the key and began turning the wheel that would open the spillway completely. Water erupted from the opening with tremendous force, and the pressure that had been building behind the dam began to release in a controlled flow that would prevent catastrophic collapse. But the mechanism was old and corroded, damaged by the explosions, and weakened by years of exposure to the elements. Opening it fully required more strength than one wounded man could provide, and more of Hale's bullets were finding their mark. Hannah tried to reach him, but Wkeza caught her arm. "The platform is collapsing," he shouted over the roar of water and gunfire. "We have to get back." As if to prove his point, a section of concrete broke away beneath Lucas's feet. He fell partway into the spillway opening, but his hands remained locked on the wheel, still turning it even as the rushing water tried to sweep him away. "Hannah!" He called out, his voice barely audible over the tremendous noise. "Remember who we used to be." With a final desperate effort, Lucas threw his full weight against the wheel mechanism. Something deep in the dam's machinery gave way, with a grinding roar of metal on stone, and the spillway opened completely. The pressure behind the dam released in a controlled flood that carved new channels through the valley, but would not destroy the settlements or the town. The dam structure groaned and settled, its foundation damaged, but holding. Lucas Whitlock, the ghost of Willow River, disappeared into the torrent he had unleashed, swept away by the very waters he had spent months learning to control and use as a weapon. Hannah screamed her brother's name, but he was gone, carried downstream toward whatever redemption awaited him in the darkness. The battle ended as abruptly as it had begun. Hale, seeing his empire washing away in the flood and his most trusted enforcer dead, made a desperate attempt to reach higher ground. But the wet concrete was treacherous, and in his haste, he slipped and fell into the spillway himself, his body following the same path Lucas had taken moments before. Webb and most of Hale's surviving men surrendered when they realized their employer was dead, and their cause was lost. The evidence Hannah had gathered, combined with testimony from the surrendering employees, provided more than enough proof to convict the survivors and expose the full extent of the conspiracy. But the immediate crisis was far from over. The controlled flooding had saved the valley from catastrophic destruction, but thousands of people still needed to be evacuated from the flood plain before the rising water could reach them. "We need to get word to town immediately," Hannah said, forcing herself to focus on the living despite her grief. "How long before the flood reaches Ash River?" Dr. Carter, his clothes torn and his face streaked with mud and blood, consulted his pocket watch. 3 hours, maybe 4. Depends on how fast the water moves through the valley. "Then we ride," Wkeza said, already moving toward their horses. "Every minute counts now." The evacuation of Ash River was chaotic, but ultimately successful thanks to the warning time provided by Lucas's sacrifice. By dawn, most of the townspeople had been moved to higher ground east of the settlement, along with whatever possessions they could carry in the time available. Hannah found herself coordinating the rescue efforts, her natural organizational skills and intimate knowledge of the community, making her invaluable in the crisis. She worked alongside Wkeza, Dr. Carter, and dozens of volunteers, helping to load wagons, carry supplies, and comfort frightened children who didn't understand why they had to leave their homes. The Steiner children were among the most traumatized evacuees. Johann and Anna had already lost their mother and their home to Hale's violence, and now they were being forced to flee again as the floodwaters approached. August, despite his own injuries and grief, worked tirelessly to help other families evacuate, driven by a determination to prevent anyone else from suffering the losses his family had endured. "Papa, where will we go?" little Anna asked as they loaded the last of the rescued families into wagons. August knelt beside his daughter, his burned hands gentle as he smoothed her hair. "We will find a new place, Kleine Liebste, a place where we can be safe and happy again." "And will Mama be there?" August's voice broke slightly. "Mama is in heaven now, watching over us. But we will carry her memory with us wherever we go." Hannah watched the exchange with tears in her eyes, thinking of her own losses and the price that had been paid for Hale's greed. Lucas was gone, swept away by the flood he had unleashed to save the people he had once been ordered to destroy. In the end, the brother she remembered had won the battle for his soul. But the victory had cost him his life. The floodwaters reached the outskirts of Ash River, just as the last evacuation wagon departed for higher ground. Hannah stood on a hilltop overlooking the valley, watching as the river reclaimed its natural floodplain and washed away the structures humans had built too close to its banks. But the flood was not the catastrophic wall of destruction Hale had planned. Instead, it was a controlled flow that renewed the valley without destroying it completely. The dam still stood its spillway permanently open to ensure that water would flow freely to all who needed it. Within weeks, the waters would recede, leaving behind rich, fertile soil perfect for new growth. "He saved us all," Hannah said quietly, thinking of Lucas's final moments. "He saved himself too," Wkeza replied. "In the end, that may have been what mattered most to him." 3 months later, Hannah stood in the courthouse of Raven's Nest, watching as the final verdicts were read in the trials stemming from the Hale conspiracy. The courtroom was packed with spectators, farmers, and townspeople from the valley, territorial officials, newspaper reporters, and curious citizens who had followed the case through detailed coverage in newspapers throughout the territory. Sheriff Claude Merrick received 20 years in territorial prison for corruption, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. Marcus Webb got 15 years for his role in the illegal land acquisitions and his complicity in the violence that had terrorized the valley. Several lesser figures in Hale's organization received shorter sentences, while others had already paid with their lives during the battle at the dam. The trials had revealed the full scope of Lucas's transformation, from idealistic young man to ruthless killer. But they had also documented his final act of redemption. The territorial judge officially recorded that Lucas Whitlock had died, saving the valley from catastrophic flooding, and his name was cleared of all crimes committed while under Hale's psychological control. Hannah had mixed feelings about that vindication. She was glad her brother would be remembered as a hero rather than a monster, But she also knew the truth was more complicated. Lucas had made choices even under extreme duress, and those choices had consequences that couldn't be erased by one final act of courage. But she also understood now what had happened to him and why. The Lucas who had become the ghost was not the brother she had grown up with, but a broken man shaped by torture and psychological manipulation into something he had never wanted to be. The Lucas who had saved the valley was the real man fighting his way back to the surface, reclaiming his humanity in the only way he knew how. Justice, she murmured to Wkeza as they left the courthouse together. Not perfect, but real. And more than we dared hope for when this all began, he replied. Back in the valley, life had slowly returned to something approaching normal, or rather, to a new normal that was better than what had come before. The town of Ash River had been rebuilt on slightly higher ground, incorporating lessons learned from the flood. The dam still stood, but its spillway remained permanently open, ensuring that water flowed freely to all who needed it. Most importantly, the territorial government had established a commission to oversee water rights throughout the region, preventing any single person or corporation from gaining the kind of monopolistic control Hale had wielded. Representatives from both settler and Native American communities served on the commission, ensuring that decisions were made fairly and with consideration for all affected parties. Hannah had been elected sheriff of the reconstructed town, running unopposed after her heroic role in exposing the conspiracy and coordinating the evacuation. It was challenging, but satisfying work enforcing the law fairly and protecting the people who had trusted her with their safety. Wkeza had accepted a position as official liaison between the territorial government and the local Cheyenne bands, helping to negotiate agreements that respected the rights and needs of all communities in the valley. His office was in the new courthouse, and he and Hannah worked closely together on matters affecting both settlers and Native Americans. That close working relationship had gradually become something more personal and meaningful. They had never formally declared their feelings, but everyone in the community could see the way they looked at each other, the quiet understanding that had developed between two people who had faced death together and emerged stronger for the experience. On a warm evening in late summer, Hannah found herself sitting by the river, with Wkeza watching the sun set over the valley they had fought to save. The water flowed clear and free, nourishing the farms and communities that dotted the landscape. Children played safely in the shallows, while their parents worked in fields that promised abundant harvests. "Do you think he found peace?" she asked, thinking of Lucas, as she often did at moments like this. "I think he found redemption," Wkeza replied thoughtfully. "Which may be more important than peace for someone who had done the things he was forced to do." Hannah nodded, understanding what he meant. Peace might have been impossible for someone who carried the memories Lucas had carried, but redemption, the chance to die for something good instead of evil, might have been enough to heal his wounded soul. "There's something I want to show you," Wkeza said, pulling a folded document from his pocket. "I found this among the papers from Hale's personal safe." Hannah unfolded the yellowed survey map and immediately recognized her father's careful handwriting. It showed the original boundaries of a public river crossing that was supposed to provide access for both settlers and Native Americans, legal proof that her father had been working toward exactly the kind of cooperation she and Wkeza were now building. Or Hale buried this deliberately, she realized. He knew it proved that much of what he claimed as private property was actually designated for public use. The territorial government has validated the survey and filed it officially, Wkeza explained. They're planning a dedication ceremony next month. They want to name it the Whitlock Cheyenne Crossing in honor of your family's contributions to peace and justice in the valley. Hannah felt tears of joy and pride welling up in her eyes. Her father's vision of cooperation and mutual respect would finally be realized, and Lucas's sacrifice would be remembered alongside it. It was a legacy she could be proud of a foundation for the future they were building together. He would have liked that, she said softly. Both of them would have. As darkness fell over the valley, Hannah and Wkeza walked back toward town, hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. They had learned that justice was not something that happened automatically. It was something that had to be fought for, protected, and renewed by each generation, willing to stand up for what was right. But they had also learned that ordinary people working together with courage and determination could accomplish extraordinary things. The ghost of Lucas Whitlock had been finally laid to rest, replaced not by bitterness or despair, but by a living legacy of redemption and hope. The Willow River flowed on through the darkness, carrying away the last traces of the past and bringing the promise of a better future for all who called the valley home. In the rebuilt town, families gathered for evening meals, children played safely in the streets, and people went to sleep knowing they lived in a place where justice mattered more than power and where the strong protected the weak instead of preying upon them. Hannah Whitlock, once a frightened bookkeeper hiding evidence of corruption, had become Sheriff Whitlock, protector of a community built on fairness and mutual respect. Wkeza, once a homeless scout searching for a place where his people could survive, had become a bridge between two worlds, helping to create understanding where there had once been only suspicion and fear. And somewhere in the darkness, carried by the eternal flow of the river, toward whatever destination awaited him, the spirit of Lucas Whitlock finally rested in peace, his long journey from victim to monster to hero, complete at last. The boy who had promised to protect his sister had kept that promise in the end, not through violence, but through the ultimate sacrifice of a man who had found his way back to his true self, just in time to save everyone he had once been taught to destroy.